Hello, everyone, and happy Tuesday. We've got a great event here, and we're going to get started shortly. I'm going to give people 3 or 4 minutes or so to finish coming on. I greatly appreciate your time and energy in showing up today. But before we get started, if you want to put into the chat where you're calling from, I always love seeing all the different cities and parts of the world that people call it are calling from or are participating from. So go ahead and put in where you're from. Michigan, Nevada, and we'll get a few more in there, I'm sure, as the next few minutes go on. So we'll just sit here quietly for a few minutes, and we'll get started about 10:04 or 10:05, something like that. I forgot the mute button. We'll be getting started here in just a minute. If you, while we're waiting, if you want to, please put into your chat and put into our chat where you're calling in from. We appreciate that. We'll get started in just 1 minute. That's where we need generative AI applied. When to mute and when to unmute. Read your mind, figure out the right combination, just do the right thing.
There'd be so many great hot mic moments.
I have this vivid imagination of thinking of a cat in a court setting talking about, I don't know what's going on here. AI take over for us. Okay, well, let's get started here now. I want to thank everyone for joining in. Welcome to the Blameless Fireside Chat webinar series. My name is Lee Atchison, and I'm the Chief Reliability Officer for Blameless. Before we get started, if you have any questions during the conversation, you can enter them through the Q&A section of the webinar or directly in the chat, either way, and we'll make sure to get them. We have Sarah listening in from Blameless. You'll see her listed as Blameless Webinars is her name on her label there. And if you have any problems, she'll be able to help you, and she'll be putting some links into the webinar as we go along as well. And let's get started. So my guest today is Christopher Karper. Chris is the Senior Director of Platform Engineering at MyFitnessPal. Chris, welcome and thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, this is great. We were talking a couple of weeks ago and getting up to speed and just kind of getting a feel for each other. I think this is going to be a great conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. Why don't you start out though by telling everyone what do you do at MyFitnessPal?
So as the head of platform engineering, it's been a little bit of a moving target, as I'm sure everybody involved in platform engineering is pretty familiar with. It's kind of a new term and everybody's figuring out what the bounds are there. But that said, sort of the traditional pillars of infrastructure and SRE fall within the team's kind of mandate, as well as we have a cloud database architect who acts in an advisory capacity for a lot of our product engineers and data engineers. And then last is we have a small new beginning developer experience focused group
Well, within the platform engineering and
within
development
platform
focus team.
engineering. Yes.
Okay, we'll have to talk about that a little bit, but when we get there, that's
Sure.
some things I definitely want to talk about there. But why don't you tell us a little bit more about you now and what your what your background is, what led you to
Sure.
this role?
Sure. So, over 25 years, started off as a software engineer, went through that, became an architect, and then an engineering leader. I've worked for government contractors, private company. Actually, started my career in the U.S. military as a communications computer programmer in the U.S. Air Force. So I've kind of seen all the different things. I guess I've been dallying all my way through my career, but yeah, it's led to me having a pretty broad set of experience, which is nice.
Yeah, this is another area I think have a lot in common. We have a very similar path up through the ranks and to get into it's a pretty common career path, I think, for someone in our line of work anyway. So
Yeah.
so I obviously I think most people who are listening in know who MyFitnessPal is. I mean, it's a very well-known brand, dating back to the very beginning of the iPhone. That's where I first heard about it, was back in those days. But I wonder if you could tell us a little bit of the well, first of all, make sure to level set, brief description of what MyFitnessPal does. But what I'm really interested in is a little bit of MyFitnessPal's history. You know, back in
Sure.
the early days of the iPhone, what brought you to where you are today?
So MyFitnessPal is a bit of an oddity, right? In that it is a pretty old app. It has been around since the beginning. It started off as a web app, but super quickly adopted kind of being mobile first with iPhone. They did really well as a startup, and they caught the eye of Under Armour, who acquired them. I'm not even sure how many years ago now, close to like 9 or 10 years ago. And then it was about 3, 4 years ago, a private equity company kind of purchased that sub department out from Under Armour, the divestiture, as we call it. And so we've been operating basically independently. They kind of set us up as an independent company, and we do all of our own management. Obviously, they're still involved with the board, but that's where we are today, is operating as an independent company. We're a health and wellness tracker. And so there's all kinds of different capabilities in there, but sort of the core offering is that we track calories and nutrition information for people who are either trying to lose weight, just track what's going into their body. People love that data, or who are trying to get healthier, maybe working out and are watching their nutrition for those purposes.
Cool, cool. So, obviously it's been around for a long time. It's been a very successful app. It's a well-known app, but you've had some struggles along the way. Do you want to talk about some of the early struggles you had?
Sure. So, full disclosure, I've only been with the team for 5 or 6 years. So some of this early history has just sort of been handed down to me, through the oral tradition. But some stuff I know kind of predates me, and I've been involved with a couple of the different stages that we've gone through. So early days, it was written as a large monolith. Which was kind of the rage back in the day, and it definitely got the
Yeah.
job done. Like, they were able to prototype quickly and move pretty promptly. And they had a pretty large team to do all that work. Lots of people dedicated, especially back then, back in early days for MyFitnessPal. A lot of work was around like database stability and scaling. Because with such a large food nutrition database, obviously problems at scale became like present really quickly. Um,
This would have been like 2006 or seven in that time frame.
yeah, around there, yes.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, so yeah, we're talking about 10 years ago, right? Almost at
Oh
this.
yeah, yeah.
So when Under Armour bought them, I wasn't involved. I know that a lot of those folks left and were not backfilled. Not sure the decision making there. I was not in leadership at the time, but MyFitnessPal kind of went into a bit of a coasting mode for a little while there. And so it was really about keeping the lights on. There was some small efforts to start to break that monolith down into microservices, but it was basically with more and more restricted size teams. And so, in any organization that is as old as MyFitnessPal, right, you're going to go through these cycles where things are a little leaner than you would prefer. And so that's definitely where things got to. And so by the
So
end of kind of that is things were pretty rocky, right? There were a fair number of incidents. It was impacting the engineers who were here. There was, retention issues. Folks would leave after they were basically just getting burned out, which just increased the load for the people that were left. But fortunately, some leadership got in place and some investments were made to finally kind of beef some of those numbers up. And that's about the time that we started seriously looking at incident management and how can we formalize that to make it a lot more approachable, measurable, and again, just to get it under control for the people involved in those incidents to make their lives a little better. And now I'm happy to say that this is easily one of the best places that I've worked at. Like, I think we have very few incidents for the size of our software and the number of people that we work with. When we have them, they're certainly noticed. I was gonna say, you can hop on any social media platform and see no end of feedback when things don't go very smoothly. But that said, especially coming from a really tumultuous time, I'm really, really proud of where the team is today. I'm really pleased to be part of it.
yeah, when I was at Amazon in the early days back in 2005, 6, 7, we used to call them New York Times events. Always wanted to avoid a mention in the New York Times. Amazon out,
Yeah.
outage at Amazon. So yeah, I know once you're big enough and well known enough, people everywhere know all about your problems and everything. And
I mean, it's a
you have to
good
be on top
problem
of
to
that.
have, right? Like
It
it
is
just means that people are depending on us and they want to be using our
exactly.
software. And it's so frustrating when it's not there for them when they want it. And I totally understand that. So I'm not going to complain about a passionate audience.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, it's a motivation to make sure you don't have incidents or you don't repeat the same incidents, et cetera. And that's kind of really what incident management's all about then is making sure that you can you don't repeat the same incidents, you learn from your incidents and have them be valuable experiences rather than just and things that you can avoid in the future.
Sure.
So you went through a period of time where you had much more frequent incidents, and that really started taking over your development efforts as incident response, essentially. And so I think as the way you described it to me earlier, your innovation started dropping, and that had an interesting side effect on incident count once you stopped innovating. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, during that time where it was getting super thin, I mean, we were shockingly small for a while on the back end side, which was the source of, most of our production outages was really around the back end software. Back then, we were still running on EC2. There was very little had been put into Kubernetes, which most of the rest of Under Armour had already adopted and moved into just because of the pace of incidents those things weren't able to be handled. So kind of the first order of business, any SRE handbook will tell you, right, is mitigation first. And so some of it was some tough choices, like while the team was small, in order to kind of preserve their sanity, we stopped doing like serious incident response after extended business hours. So by 9 p.m., even if the site was down, we just had few enough people, we couldn't support it overnight. And
Mm-hmm.
so that certainly got some attention and some investment, and that was actually part of kind of turning it around. So I'll say that during that time when it was hard to get investment, really helping people understand what the cost was helped a lot in turning it around. But that said, like everybody's attention was basically focused into those incidents. And so there was very little time to be moving forward or investing in new features or even just making our situation better. Fortunately, because of some of those calls, by protecting kind of the sanity and energy of the engineers, we were able to finally complete the move into Kubernetes and do some other things there that basically brought a lot of reliability and stability to the platform. So we weren't having a lot of the same kind of issues. One that was happened pretty frequently was our Percona clusters would just kind of fall over for some of our larger databases. And that is absolutely not any fault of that product. It's just we did not have any DBAs remaining with the company at that time. And so it was basically back-end engineers doing the best they could to support those things. Again, we're talking years ago here, but yeah, it was tough to keep those things up and running like that. All that said is when we finally did get those things stabilized, because there wasn't a lot of innovation, we actually wound up at a spot where we had very close to zero incidents after, I would say, probably about a year of concerted effort of just addressing reliability problems. We basically got
That's
It's an
down to
amazing
effectively zero,
turnaround.
which is
Yeah.
awesome. But since then, our incident count has gone up, which is actually a super healthy sign, in my opinion, because when you're not changing anything, it's easier to keep it running, right? And so, really, that
Exactly.
was the
Yeah,
net
yeah.
result: is we kind of harvested a year of no like reliability or production problems because nobody was pumping out anything new for the prior year. And so it just kind of sat there very stably. It was kind of a keep the lights on operation, as you'll hear the term, I'm sure, a lot. Fortunately, because this was right before the time of that divestiture where private equity firms stood us up independently and we've been able to invest in ourselves pretty aggressively, like it just sort of set the stage for us to be able to innovate independently. And so now we're seeing an increased incident count from zero, but still at a very low, but what feels like a manageable, healthy rate.
Yeah, it's a lot of people think that zero incidents is the goal, and it really isn't. It's a manageable level of incidents because if you have zero incidents, if you're not doing anything wrong, you're not going to have incidents. If you're
Right.
not doing anything, you're not going to do anything wrong.
Right.
If you want to do something, you're going to do things wrong, and you're going to make mistakes, and things do happen.
Sure.
The key is to limit them and learn from them, and that's really kind of the goal here. You used a phrase that I really liked in our when we talked earlier. I want to make sure our audience heard it as well. And that phrase was, at healthy level, managing incidents is a healthy thing.
Yeah,
Can you
absolutely.
talk a little bit more about that? I really love that phrase, and I use that now. But so thank you for that. But can you talk a little bit more what you mean about that and how it affects, how it's related to what we're talking about?
Sure, absolutely. So thank you for that, by the way. But yeah, I mean, it's an immediate follow-on to what we were just talking about is, early on, when I was an early engineering leader, this is one of the things that I had to tackle was basically how do you deal with, all these folks leaving, the intense on-call, expectations, the amount of time that you're dealing with incidents. And my goal was to get to zero, right? Because I was, as a new leader, I'm like, clearly we need to just stop having these problems. I think through time and kind of having different experiences over the years, I've realized that incidents are good, which I mean, you'll hear, talked about. And again, anybody in the field, Honeycomb saying these kinds of things, you've got Google saying these kind of things. Incidents aren't bad. You should be encouraging people to have plenty of incidents early, ideally before user impact occurs, if you can get your alerting in line and understand what's happening. But ultimately, if you're not having incidents, that means you're not taking risks and investing in your business or your product aggressively enough. That's the sign that things are a little too cooled off. And so
Right,
obviously you
right.
don't want to be delivering widget after widget after widget without concern to stability and reliability. But on the other side, you can't let reliability take over and drown out innovation. Because as you said, when you're trying new things, some of them aren't going to work out. And that works both in
Right.
business metrics as well as in technical metrics. And sometimes that will cause outages.
Yep, yep. It's all about risk management. It's not about uh, risk removal. It's about risk management.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's
Yeah,
shocking how much of just honestly all of engineering leadership is risk management.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's I think that's probably been one of the biggest keys to success in messaging outside of people who do this job every day is talking about incidents and any investments in reliability, all of that in terms of reducing risk or managing risk.
Absolutely. There's another related area that I really like talking about. I talk about this a lot in my writings in general. That's it's parallel to this, and that's chaos engineering, right? The whole idea behind chaos engineering is let's inject a reasonable number of failures so that we can see how our system responds and how our system not means not only the software but our people and our processes and things like that, and use it as a mechanism to build and improve the software as well as build and improve our tooling. I wonder, have you ever used chaos engineering either at MyFitnessPal or elsewhere?
So I'll say we have done it manually. We're not using any automated tools or anything like that, but we will do things like desktops, game days. We will do exercises where we purposefully break things. We've set up parallel environments that, you know, are essentially like a dev or an integ environment, copy of production, and we'll go break things, and then we'll go through the exercise of correcting those, which is, to be fair, probably a little tangential to what people think of as chaos engineering today. So I wouldn't say truly 100% we're all in there. I think it's something we're working towards.
Yeah,
For us, one of the key ingredients has been, which you said in the beginning, right, is injecting the correct amount of chaos. Like, how do you test your systems without actually endangering your systems and the user's experience and all those things? So step one, you've got to measure, right? And what do you
yeah,
measure to make sure that you've got room for those for those experiments? Sorry, for us, the answer has been SLOs. Like, we're investing in the SLO framework because, you know, we have a monolith, we have over 18 some years, we just got some weird microservices, right? Like, if you were to draw it out and architect what the goal would be today, you probably wouldn't draw it that way. But through the fullness of time, we have what we have today. So our service boundaries don't always align with how we think of how users interact, or how users even think they interact with our software. So we've kind of instituted journey level objectives. We use the SLO framework, and I think it's important for people adopting or looking into SLOs to understand that it really is a valuable framework, less than just one prescribed way to do a thing. And so we've adopted that, but we rally around user journeys. And so we track things there. We make sure that we're tracking our error budgets. And if something has not exhausted error budget and there's plenty left, and we know that user impact is low while we're within that range, then we know we can start doing tabletops and experiments and, you know, potential just dangerous changes, right? Like, anybody in the field knows that some things you ship and it feels safe, and some things you're like, this could go very badly. And
right.
so that's when our tolerance gets higher. But like, the measurement for me is really the key part of that equation. And I'm grateful to say that MyFitnessPal is doing a lot of that work now. We have Jellos, JLOs, JLOs. The team loves to call them different things. But the idea is that we have these objectives around the user journeys, and we know where we have some tolerance.
Yeah, I can hear the jingle in the back of my head, JELLO, and yeah, I can just
Yeah.
put out a couple letters
Absolutely.
there, and this is what you have. But I like the idea of JLO's journey level objectives as opposed to SLOs because it applies to a lot different architectures, a lot different systems. It isn't dependent on your architecture, and so for someone with a monolith or a partial monolith or a warded monolith is probably in similar ways to the sorts of things we're talking about here. Anyone with that sort of architecture, a journey level objective accomplishes the same thing or many of the same things. They're not quite the same, but many of the same things that SLOs do. And it can be quite effective even if you can't use SLOs. So we have someone here. John has asked a question. Have you adopted the open SLO standard at all?
No, we have not. Not through any dislike of it. Just, we've been looking at SLOs and trying to bring it on for probably about a year and a half. It's kind of been a hearts and minds kind of conversation with a lot of the company, because one of the aspects I'll say about doing journey level objectives is, you're right, they're not the same as SLOs, and they're not necessarily as technically oriented. But to us, that's been an asset, because one of the things I think that's easy to forget when you're a back end support team like platform or infrastructure or SRE, where you're not necessarily directly in the product or working on product features, is staying customer focused. We want to be focused on our
Yeah.
users and their experiences. And so we do have true SLOs, and we do use SLOs for some of our larger, more important services that are central to the way our architecture works. But the journey level objectives help keep everybody from product all the way through the engineering process to customer happiness focused on our users' experience. When there's a technical outage, if CPU usage is high, does it matter is always the question that we have to ask. And that's really tough to answer at 3 a.m. when your pager's going off. There's, probably 4 ringtones from pager duty that just cause me instant anxiety after all these years. And so, like, when that goes off and you've got to make a call, does this matter? You're probably going to fail on the side of getting out of bed, logging in, and finding out, actually, it's not really impacting anyone. I can go back to bed. Whereas like SLOs and JLOs help us answer that question much more correctly and much quicker. And so
Without
that would
completely
be,
waking up.
yeah, I mean, basically, you would
Yeah,
never even get the page if we don't
right.
know that it's impacting a user in one of the ways that we've identified in a critical user journey. Then you can handle it in the morning, right? Because again,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
all a game of managing risk and people's time and attention.
So this is a little bit tangential to what we've been talking about, but have you had uh, um, problems with too many pages to your engineers and the fatigue that comes from that pager fatigue? I couldn't think of the phrase pager
Sure.
fatigue, but that's exactly what I'm thinking of here.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
like, yeah,
is that a
alert.
problem either previously or now with
Yeah,
what you're
100%.
doing?
It will always be a problem, right? It's kind of like power washing your patio or something, right? It's one of those things that, like, yeah, you can clear it out and you can make it perfect right now today. But in a year, after software has changed, after people have changed, maybe something is now self-healing that still alerts you. It's constantly requiring attention, so that you're not just sending too many alerts. The question we always ask when we have on call after an on call shift ends, typically we do 1 week on call shifts here. And so at the end of the week, we ask, like, were you interrupted a bunch? Were all of your pages actionable? Right? Because if you're not getting actionable pages, if we hear from 2 different people on call that this page went off and wasn't actionable, that then triggers a discussion. Is this valuable? Should we even be alerting, or should just be an informational warning just sent to Slack that somebody can read later? And so I think the culture has to be always aware that fatigue is a factor. Even when they're important and actionable, that still doesn't mean, depending on the pace and how many you're getting, right, you may have to move to grouping those alerts. One problem we had for a while is that when one thing would break, there were so many, upstream and downstream dependencies. You get one alert and you know that 9 to 10 more were about to come in.
Right, right.
Right. And so finding a way to wrangle that and say, okay, it's actually just one event now, could be a necessity.
Do you do paging by um, functionality or by services, or how do you group your pager rotation schedules?
So right now our pages are split by platform, I guess. So my platform group has one rotation, our backend group has a rotation, and then our mobile platform, so iOS and Android teams
Got
will
it.
have a rotation. They almost never get paged overnight because they're delivering an app that goes through the App Store process and things like that. So when they do have incidents, they're usually at least notified during business hours about those.
Right, right. So does that process, so does that split? Sounds like it might actually reduce the number of problems that you would have where a problem that's in one group actually spills over and pages another group, even though they really don't need to be involved with it. Do you tend to have that sort of spillover occur? With only 3 groups and one of them being an app group, maybe it's not as
Sure.
big of a deal for you guys. But do you see that problem in general?
Excuse me. I'd say yes. I think that I don't. We will see that behavior. I won't say that
Okay.
it's a problem, right? But within everybody's sphere of what they think about, what they worry about, what they know that they're responsible for. So, like, our web team has a rotation as well. I forgot to mention them. Shout out to the web team.
Oh, okay.
Uh, but like a frequent thing that we'll see is perhaps something goes a little wibbly within the platform. I know it's a very technical term. Maybe not all your viewers have heard that term, but I think they know exactly the spirit that I'm talking about here.
The longer
Something
you're in the
goes,
industry, the more you hear that term.
yeah,
So,
exactly. Just something goes a little sideways, and who knows
yeah,
exactly what it is. But it could be a platform thing that impacts maybe just one service, that maybe the SLOs or just the automated alerts that are there that are kind of pre-SLO thinking. We still rely on a lot of those. Maybe they are slower to fire, whereas the web team has a very aggressive view, and maybe that one function impacts login. for them, they'll tend to get an alert and be the first to call out in our triage channel, hey, something looks weird, we're getting elevated alerts. And then maybe the back end alert will go off, and then a more tolerant platform alert will go off. And again, some of this is just a function of web has that very laser focused view on their piece of functionality.
Right, right.
Whereas within platform, it's diluted a little bit maybe by all the things that are working, and this one that's a problem hasn't raised a percentage maybe to a certain threshold. So I'll say we do see behaviors where things cascade or spill over teams. I think that the teams here are very good at identifying where the responsibility lies, and usually kind of one representative from impacted teams will hang around in an incident to ask questions, to help verify mitigation, and those kind of things. I mean, we're definitely, the goal is to keep your response team as small as possible, right? You want to impact as few people, but you also want that. Conversely, especially as an engineering leader, you want that pool to be very diverse, and you want to never impact the same person twice in a row, right? You don't want to build experts who have to be there
Right,
for, one particular type of incident. It happens,
right, right.
right? Again, that's just one of those things that, a lot of the job is careful gardening. And if you don't take care of one section of your garden for a while, you'll come back and find out that there's one super plant. And you're like, okay, how do we get this information out?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. You know, that actually brings us into talking more about blameless specifically. But before we do that, let's talk about your incident management process itself. Can you describe at a decent high level the specific process that you go through when an incident is identified?
Sure. I mean, the first couple of steps happen really rapidly, right? You're notified that something is going on. Usually there's an automated alert. Very occasionally, this happened much more frequently in the long history of MyFitnessPal, but at this point, it's very infrequent that we'll hear customer reports of something coming in. So our customer happiness team has a direct line to basically everybody on the engineering team, and they can say, hey, like, we've got a fast mover here, like 10 people in the last hour have contacted us to say X is happening, we're not sure what's up, can somebody take a look? So there's sort of the becoming aware of that there is a problem stage, and then you categorize it, right? Like, is this just a data issue? Is this kind of your default reliability issue with a backend service or something like that? Or is it potentially a security issue? And those go through a similar process to the rest, but obviously, become very locked down, private, and because there's so many regulatory components around that and compliance things, I won't really be talking a ton about those, but that's one of the categories. So once you kind of categorize, then you can begin responding. Very often, it's just something that there's a run book for, and one of the engineers won't necessarily start an incident. If they happen to be on call, they get paid, they roll a deployment, and everything seems fine. They'll just sit on that and it goes away, and you just kind of talk about this thing that happened. But when it is truly something that requires coordination or is a little bit bigger, you start the incident, people get involved. Usually it's just the incident responder. We have high and low priority incidents. For high priority incidents, we will page an incident commander whose responsibility is just communications outside to our stakeholders. So that can be updating our status page. It can be talking with our executives who we ask to not join any incidents, just because the focus needs to be on the mitigation work and the engineering. And people can speak their mind and, do their job as they typically would day to day. And we don't want to increase the heat in the room, so to speak, by having a bunch of leaders sit in there. It's complicated by the fact here at MyFitnessPal that we have some super capable leaders who've all come up through technical paths. And so a lot of us really want to get involved in that incident, but that's kind of part of the discipline, I guess, is not doing that. And again, that spreads that experience. So that's one of the ways there. Once the incident happens, the focus is mitigation, understanding what happens enough, or what has happened enough that we can mitigate any user impacts. Once those are mitigated, then, you're kind of beginning either a more permanent fix, whether it's we quickly rolled back this container, but we need to actually revert the Git change that caused this problem. So there may be some cleanup work. And then we, just move on to kind of your root cause analysis and retro process. You basically document everything that happened, what were all the contributing factors, and then you talk about what you learned, the classic questions. Where did we get lucky? Where were we unlucky? What did we learn? What surprised us? What did go well out of the process? And then we write up that retro. I think the place that we're trying to do better is in shared learning. I think the people who are involved in our incidents tend to learn very well from them. Obviously, they're a huge investment that only your business has that knowledge now when something goes wrong with your system, which is a gold mine, right? Like that's operational
Right.
knowledge that nobody else has. So the teams involved tend to learn, but getting that information out to people who weren't necessarily involved in the incident, some of them are, you know how it goes, right? Like some are interesting and crunchy and you want to know what happened. And some are like, oh, that thing went bad. There's always problems with that. I don't really care what happened, but like there's a learning there. And how do we get that to people? And that's where we are today, is trying to answer that question.
So let's talk about that process, and specifically, let's get into some of the tooling. And this gets into
Sure.
using Blameless. First of all, why do you use Blameless? Why is Blameless important to you, to this process?
Sure. So, I mean, I'll say the choice to use Blameless for us was before my time, not super long before my time. I know the people who made the decision, but I did not. So I wasn't part of that committee, I guess. But that said, I think the big things for us is we basically live and work within Slack. And so having a Slack integration and things that make the work happen in Slack is really important to us. And Blameless has been really great at that. Being able to quickly spin up an incident, have that dedicated response room where people can be pulled in. It really helps concentrate the focus. Like you try to keep outside chatter to a minimum. It just really builds a process that supports us in effectively addressing the problem, staying mitigation focused, as well as, again, we have a stakeholder information channel that Blameless propagates the summaries out to. So that when there is an incident happening, the incident commander has the ability to go to a place and talk to all the stakeholders within the business. And then in the end, being able to track that retro and relate it back to the incident that happened is really great. One thing that we haven't been doing, but we're an Atlassian company here, Jira and Confluence, which I'm sure tons of people are, but we
Right.
are now beginning to rely on the integration with Jira to create a ticket. And that's to help us do better at our follow-up actions. So we had been kind of handling them ad hoc, whereas just, we have the checklist within Blameless, and we just sort of go back and check to make sure that people are doing them. Some things get
Mm,
dropped, and as the team grows and we
right.
continue to scale out, kind of, we start off with people over process, and we just ask people to be responsible stewards, but at a certain time, it gets big enough that it's just not feasible to ask people to just keep it in mind. And that's where that formalized tracking comes in.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And more regulations are requiring tracking that in a more formal way than they used to as well. Are you in your industry? Do you run into that too much? Are you tied
Uh,
enough closely
Not to
enough to
draw
healthcare
undue
that that
attention to
becomes a
ourselves,
problem?
but
Or
no, I think in
uh,
general, because we're health adjacent, there's always an
got
awareness
it.
of what's going on with like HIPAA law and things like that. And I will not speak to it. I'm not an expert, and I know things are, the law is the law. It's not necessarily common sense, right? So I'll say that we have not had any particular regulatory pressure other than the fact that we are direct to consumer. And so there's a lot of privacy legislation that we have to abide by and things like that. But that's like the smallest part of what we do. We
Right.
actually collect very little PII here for our product. We just don't need a ton of it to give the product that we do.
Yeah, that makes sense. Go ahead. No, you were going to say something. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, like, outside of that, we still try to act responsibly, right? So I think that anybody on this team would be comfortable doing work that had regulatory compliance issues, because we just take the attitude that, like, if that's the right way to be in another industry that's protected, it's still the right way to be in ours, even if it's not protected data. And so I think the engineers and the folks who do get involved in these incidents tend to treat our user data very carefully. We do try to responsibly report user impacting things. We have our status site. We have, for a while, there was a Twitter account. I think we might have lost one of those in the troubled times. We'll just call it. But yeah, there are, we have a great customer happiness team, and I can't say enough good about them. I've been really pleased through all the years at MyFitnessPal that even when it felt like we couldn't get the engineering resources that we really needed, the customer happiness team absolutely held down the fort for us. And they just have a great reputation. We love them within our company. And if you don't have a strong customer service team or a customer happiness team or whatever your customer success, whatever your business calls it, like I feel for you because they have absolutely saved our bacon a million times over.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. The customer happiness teams are really they're the ones that generate the most meaningful. Um, uh, I'll use the word incident because I can't think of a better one at the time. Most meaningful incident notifications to you than anything else. That's much
100%.
more important if you get a page request from a customer support individual than from an automated tool. The value of that page is so much higher.
Yeah, there was a time when the automated alerting wasn't in a healthy place at MyFitnessPal, and the majority of our incidents came from the customer happiness team. And that,
Right.
as a technician, as someone who values the craft of engineering, is a painful thing to have to say. Just
Yeah.
the organization had gotten into such a rough place. They were essentially our SRE team, which is
Yeah.
bananas. But they did the job. They did it excellently, and we're in a better place now because we've had their support. So, not to turn it into too much of a love fest, just, for real, thank your customer happiness people. They deserve it.
Yep, definitely, definitely. So let's talk about the shared learnings and the feedback loop here now and how you feed things back. You mentioned the run books. Is that the run book the primary way you feed back learnings for the incident process? Obviously, you feed back learnings having to do with we need to restructure this code or do other development processes.
Sure.
And that's one thing, but there's also feedback in how you responded to the incident and feedback in being able to detect these sorts of things earlier so they don't become incidents, et cetera, et cetera. How does that process work as far as, or how successful are you at that process of making that work? Is really what I want to ask there.
Yeah, it's hard to say what's the best way to effectively share information, right? When you look at all the different styles of learners, some people like to read, some people like to watch a video or podcasts or whatever. We effectively can't give that many kinds of, education, I guess, from incidents. It's just not realistic that every engineer would have the skills to produce all that media as well. But that said, I'd say that we're pretty good at learning the things that are a little more technically crunchy. Like if, we know that a certain pattern in software, an architectural pattern has failed us, that information will get out and you'll see a really decreased use. You'll see people going into software to remove instances of those architectural patterns. Those are the things that are a little easier. Run books are essential for us, and I'd say that we're still probably about 25% of where I'd love for us to be. And this is something where I've talked with the Blameless folks quite a bit, as I think there's a huge opportunity in like run book automation. Like with Gen AI tooling, this is one of the best opportunities I think we have to make incident responders' lives better, right? Is to be able to, more than just giving them step by step, letting them click buttons through the process. There's no typos, there's no cut and paste problems, things like that. That said, the run books are essential for us because we divide our on call by the platform, right? Someone on the back end team, given the huge number of services that we have here at MyFitnessPal, may be on call and responding to a service they've literally never seen, touched, looked at the source, anything like that. And so we have an IDP, we use Backstage, hosted by our partners at Roadie, which is really useful for us to be able to collect all that information together. You can get a quick overview of the services and their dependencies. So coming in cold to a service that may be malfunctioning, there's a couple of things that we always try. Like it's always safe for us to roll a service in Kubernetes. So sometimes just roll it and see what happens, right? A lot of
Yeah.
times that'll just fix some weirdness that happened. We're back to the wibbly point again. As much as I would love to say we understand deeply every little thing that has gone wrong, sometimes it just goes sideways and rolling it fixes it, and that's enough.
Yeah.
But after that, right, then you want to start getting into run books. Has somebody seen this problem before? Things like that. So I'll say the retro tends to be one of the biggest outcomes that we get is when there is someone who came in, was like, this felt like an approachable problem, but I just didn't know what to do. That's our cue to make sure that we go get a run book covering that area. And we really
So
depend
the
on newer and junior engineers to be identifying those things, because those of us who've been around a long time are just used to the weird shit that's around, and you're just like, yeah, that's
right,
weird, right? But somebody new's
yeah,
like, that doesn't work at all, and you're like, you know what, now that you point it out, kind of head slap moment, of course that's broken.
yeah. So your run books are more educational for um, someone who's not as familiar with that particular part of the application, whether they're a new person or someone who's focusing on a different part of the application than they're getting paged on. But what about filtering out incidents and knowing, do you have a process you go through of saying, well, let's just reboot, and if that works, then there's no incident. Is there a filtering process like that, or does it all fall down into a page to your development team, and the run books help them decide what to do, but it's pretty much up to them what to do?
No, I'd say it's more of the latter there. It's certain we leave it to every engineer. I think that's something that we hope to address, is to start doing a little bit of automated response before something gets to an engineer. That's not a place where we are today. I think again, this is one of the things that I'm excited around, sort of this Gen AI boom and the tools that are
Right.
going to come out and what the capabilities really actually are of that technology. And I think that's one place that we're going to see a lot of improvements over the next 3 to 5 years. It would be surprising to me if engineers on call were actually the first line responders anymore.
Yeah, I actually want to get into Gen AI, and I actually wanted to end with that as well too. But before we do, there is one question here from John, who's asking a question about your JLOs. And they want to know whether or not you use JLOs outside of technology, for example, by the customer happiness team. Are other people using JLOs within your organization, or are they limited to the application and the infrastructure underneath?
So the answer is kind of. I'll say that
Okay.
certainly engineers are the primary drivers and consumers of those JLOs. That said, one of our core values at MyFitnessPal is to be data inspired, which is, kind of a nice way of saying have data to back your decisions and your proposals and things like that. And so we work with the product team. The product owners actually decide the thresholds for those JLOs. So they're invested and they're thinking about, for this feature to be successful for our customers, what kind of successes are we going to need to see, right? Like, is it about the speed of the response? Some things we just don't care how long they take within some sort of reasonable human scale. Like, when we're talking about milliseconds versus a second, some features, it just doesn't matter how fast they are. It does matter how reliable or available they are, what their throughput can be. So we work with products, so they should always be keeping that in mind as they ask for new features from engineering. One of the questions we often got from engineers developing new product features is like, when is this done? When is it good enough? I can make it faster by adding a Redis cache. Should I? Right. And so having those SLOs or JLOs defined around that feature really helps them know when they're done. What's the appropriate level of investment is probably the right way to say that. And then customer happiness also can be informed when we're missing those. So they'll understand that there's customer impact. So I'll say it's less used by customer happiness, but it becomes a shared vocabulary across the company that everybody's now speaking about the same things. And you're generating great data around what services are actually. I mean, how many places have we worked where you're like, that's just a shitty service. Nobody wants to work on that. But it's hard to actually quantify. Like, how do you show leadership that it's time to invest in this service? And this has been a great tool for having those conversations. So I think, yes, it's used by everybody in that way, and that it's a shared vocabulary and we're all working from the same data. But primarily it's engineering driving, obviously getting the SLIs populated, and then having a formula and some platform that can evaluate those on a continuous basis to see about your compliance to your SLO and what your error budget is, and are you burning through it at some wild rate again. But it just becomes a
So
tool for discussions.
let's twist that a little bit and look at it from another angle, though. Because what you're describing there are still what I would call technical JLOs. Your customer happiness team may or may not follow closely the JLOs for the application. Some of them they do, some of them they don't. But that's kind of what the direction you're talking about. They're involved in your JLOs that are part of the application.
Right.
But what about objectives? What do you want to call them? SLOs, SLAs, JLOs, whatever you want to call them, that your customers happiness team has, number of 5-star reviews, number, those sorts of non-technical objectives. Do they use something like JLOs for that sort of work, or is that totally independent?
No, that right now that's independent. I would say that if you're looking to solve that problem for your business, this framework can work, right? This is the SLO framework is basically about measurement and turning that into an error budget to give yourself some room, some air gap at the top, so to speak. And there's no reason that you couldn't do that. That said, the business side of MyFitnessPal tends to be much more KPI focused, and I'd say they're using a more similar to like old alerts,
Mm.
right? We watch for trends and changes in those numbers, but they are not doing any kind of like SLI drivers up into that. That's just not, again, there's no problem with
Not
that
what they do.
approach. They just don't.
It's different. Yep. No, that makes sense. I asked because I think that's what John was trying to get to in the question. So I want to make sure
Sure.
you were able to answer from both directions. So great. So now let's focus some on Gen AI, and it's kind of a good thing to end with. And you've been involved in incident management in some way, shape, or form for probably many years. Um, what's new and exciting in incident management, and what does Gen AI do in? Yeah, anticipating your answer is going to be Gen AI, I guess, but
Yeah, what's your
this is
favorite
more
new
specific
feature
to
and
the
why is
one.
it
But
Gen AI? Is that what we're asking?
exactly, yeah, I
Uh,
guess that's what I'm asking. Yes.
Yeah, I think one of the things, I mean, obviously, as SREs, as platform engineers, we're constantly looking to reduce toil, right? And right now, like any kind of incident response is going to have toil. Like it is work keeping stakeholders updated. It's work when a new incident responder drops in. Say you have the misfortune of being in one of these big 8-hour incidents, right? Like, oh, we loaded data wrong, and it is just a nightmare to untangle. And so you'll have somebody drop in on hour 4 because you need to know what this service is doing with that data now. How do you get that person up to speed effectively? And this is where I think Gen AI really shines because, like, if it hallucinates a little, but they're like 90% there, that's great. Like, that's exactly where we need them to really have enough context to begin the discussion and start answering questions. Stakeholders want to constantly be kept up to date. And you can do that on a time basis with people, which is how we do that today with incident commanders, is they're asked on a regular cadence, depending on the severity of the incident, to update stakeholders. Gen AI is great again for getting people the gist of what's going on, what the current state is, the context leading up to that. And then what I'm really looking forward to is like the narrative portion of retro building is crucially important. And it's also a huge drag, right? It's just, that's not where people want to be spending their time, in my experience. Most of the engineers are really thinking about like forward thinking, like how do I adapt this learning? What did break? It's very kind of crunchy and technical. Whereas somebody coming in cold to that retro who wants to learn about what happens needs that full context. And I'm really excited about Gen AI being able to do work there and summarizing everything that happened. It's
Yeah,
good at sort of filtering out the noise, I guess.
yeah, I think one of the things I'd add to that as well too that I'm excited about is not only writing summary texts, whether it's for management or retrospectives or whatever, but also assisting with things like, okay, and we recommend adding this entry to your run book, and to make propose those suggestions or recommendations. The more that the AI system can know about what your current run books are and about the current set of incidences are, the more it can generate valuable answers to the question of, do I need to do an update right now or not?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a couple of opportunities within the field that are going to be hopefully really great. I mean,
Yeah.
we're all crossing our fingers and seeing right now, but I'm excited about, like, I love the idea. There's already products out there now that you can give it a scenario of what happened and it will generate a run book for you. I believe there's even a company out there. I'm not going to say their name because I'm not 100% positive this is what they do, but I believe their premium product will actually automate those run books for you. And so that's
Mhm.
all Gen AI assisted already. And so that's going to be
Yeah.
getting much better. I'm excited about, like, let's take an incident today and in 3 years using Gen AI tooling, make it not ever happen, right? Like if we have automated run books and we know very clearly certain signals require running that, just handle it. right? Well,
Yeah.
again, this is where I say I'd be surprised if first line, incident response will actually be human in a couple of years here. And I don't think that's really overstating. I know people love to predict the future. Just, I mean, we can see where we've removed humans from processes already using Gen AI tools. And I think that's going to be one that really helps people scale well is that, if we're just going to roll, whatever rollout in Kubernetes is impacted by this metric, even just as a pre-step, that may take out 10% of what becomes incidents is just because, maybe somebody junior was on call that day, wasn't sure. So we always encourage our engineers, it's better to start an incident and have it end early than to not start an incident and be struggling with a real problem alone. So like, and that's really the key for us is that incidences it's a resource pool. It's a good thing.
Right.
And so you have to constantly be focused on that. But again, with some of these Gen AI tools, we may not even see incidents. One place where I'm really excited, and this isn't necessarily around incidents, but I'll say, I think there's a fall-on effect is at MyFitnessPal. We're not scale like Google and Facebook, but we've got enough that like we have to think about it. And I'm excited for like model-based auto scaling, right? Like everything we do to scale today is essentially reactive. And it would be
Right.
fantastic to see a tool that brings some proactivity into that and says, oh, I follow your media channels and I'm seeing a lot of people talk about this new feature that went out. I'm going to scale those up, right? Watching Twitter feeds and Facebook and LinkedIn and wherever else things get talked about these days.
That's a great idea. I've seen AI being used to do things like identify complex trends and do figure out from that, but read outside sources and make conclusions about how that's going to impact your site. That's extremely valuable for for news sites, for anyone that has those sorts of events that occur. That's great. That's great. This has been a great conversation again. I love having these conversations. Very much appreciate your time, Chris. My guest today has been Chris Karper. Chris is the Senior Director of Platform Engineering at MyFitnessPal. And Chris, thank you so much for your time today. And now
Yeah, thanks,
for
Lee. It's been a
everyone,
pleasure being here. I appreciate it.
oh, I appreciate you. Thank you. For everyone else here now too, I want to talk about, I got a couple announcements I want to make. First is we have a brand new self-guided tour of Blameless, a demo that's available just within the last couple of days. If you're interested in learning more about Blameless, don't want to talk to anybody or don't want to call us or directly or any of the other ways of contacting us, you can interact with this demo directly and see um, how we work and what we do for you. The next announcement is our next webinar, which is going to be 3 weeks from today. That's April 16th. And it's going to be about how to sell change in your organization. We still working out the details, but it's going to be that general topic, and we'll have more details to come, hopefully within a couple of days. We also have a new case study that's in production at the moment, and that one's specifically on MyFitnessPal, and it's featuring our friend Chris here again, and that should be live soon. And Sarah will put links to all of those things in our chat. Sarah, thank you very much for doing that. And I think that's all I have. Chris, do you have any closing remarks?
No, like I said, I just really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. I think it's I think it's important that folks talk about this, right? Imposter syndrome's a thing. Like everybody feels like they're under the gun at some point, and it's so crucial to be having these conversations because like everybody's dealing with it, right? Like hashtag hug ops when you see a site go down. I hope your first site is like I feel for those SREs and those engineers responding. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much. And everyone, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in 3 weeks.